All right, my name's John Schaub from the Rock Island Arsenal. Today's program is Commissioning and Owner's Perspective. Of course, up front we have all of our standard AIA nomenclature, copyrighted materials, course description. Of course, I'm not going to bother to read that. Learning objectives, we're talking about why commissioning is important to the owner from our perspective. How should commissioning services be acquired? What are some of the typical stumbling blocks we've come across to a successful commissioning process? And finally, what needs to be done to improve and refine the commissioning process from our perspective. All right, now I've said all the AIA disclaimers, I have to say ours. The opinions expressed here within this presentation do not represent the official opinion of the Rock Island Arsenal, IMCOM Sustainment Command, the U.S. Army, Department of Defense, or the United States federal government. Before I begin, a little background on me. I left Iowa State University in 1983. What's unique about me is I have worked on all sides of a project. As an engineer, designer, as a contractor, and as a owner. I'm a professional engineer in Iowa and Illinois. You can see the years here I've served as a designer and facilities engineer. What's also nice is I also had the ability to work with the tools in the field when I worked for the contractors. So that's another advantage. That's pretty unusual in our area. In our area, once you're an engineer for a design firm, that's where you stay. You just rotate between the 3 or 4 firms in our area. I've worked on everything from residential to commercial buildings. Actually, I started in the nuclear plants out in Pennsylvania. University research centers. Prior to 2014, my commissioning was basically limited to checklists as a subcontractor, sheet metal contractor. There was no fancy, what I would call commissioning at that time. And in 2014 is when I came to the Rock Island Arsenal. To understand some of the things I'm going to talk about, you need to understand a little bit how our projects are, I want to say, delegated or assigned. Typically, there's 3 wide areas. One is less than $250,000. That project is awarded to our base contractor. We do the design, we do the commissioning, we do the whole 9 yards on the island. And then there's $250,000 to $2 million, roughly. That is solicited through our accounting command. We can either be design, bid, build, or design, build. If we're design, bid, build, again, we do the engineering in-house. Once you get above those numbers, then you become subservient to the Corps of Engineers. So everything above $2 million essentially has to go through the Corps of Engineers, and it can be design, build, or design, bid, build. Most of the time it is design, build. Commissioning requirements, from what I've seen as far as the government's concerned, are in the United Facilities Criteria and the United Facilities Guide specifications. We make reference to the other guides, but as far as the Army is concerned, the information we're concerned with is within these 2 specifications. The UFGS has evolved. Originally, the requirements were in Division 15. This is years ago. Commissioning grew to encompass all of the building systems, so they moved the commissioning requirements out of Division 15 and Division 1 and tried to lump it all together. However, the requirements were still kind of geared towards mechanical systems. Then as DDC controls became more popular, they actually developed a separate checklist in Division 25 that deals with basically the interface or the main computer system between the DDC controllers and your server. And then I just noticed recently that the mechanical requirements have again been pulled out of Division 1 and are now in Division 23, although it also addresses Division 22, which is the plumbing side. So they've taken it out of Division 1, become very specific in terms of mechanical requirements, and they've placed it in Division 23, so it's a lot easier to separate the requirements. I'm surprised they haven't done anything with the electrical. Their government's requiring the installation of a lot of electrical lighting controls, and we've started to put them on the island. But for some reason, we have tended to ignore those for the moment. So we are kind of on our own when that comes around. Okay, so my first experience with commissioning at the Rock Island Arsenal was 2 family housing projects. One was what we call FY15 project, and then the other one was an FY16 project. One was about 50 homes, and the other one was about 30 homes. The FY16 project was awarded after the FY15, but was completed before the FY15 project. Commissioning execution, the way the specs were written, both projects required the commissioning agent to be a subcontractor to the general contractor. For the FY15 housing project, the commissioning agent was an out-of-town commissioning agent, actually from the state of Texas, which is where the general contractor was from. They also provided balancing, so they were the same firm. Commissioning and balancing were the same firm. For the FY16 project, we used a local commissioning agent and balancing contractor. Commissioning and balancing were provided by 2 separate firms, both of which I was familiar with because they were local to the Quad Cities. Pre-construction. When I got there, they were just finishing up the design, and we were doing a design reviews, 100% design review. Both projects called for a design review by the commissioning agent. However, I never saw what they presented, so I have no idea what they found or what they did not find. But what surprised me was the fact that when I reviewed the drawings, I had nearly 900 comments on 95% design documents. That is a lot. In fact, I had so many, they could not upload them through the Dr. Checks program online. They had to upload a long list. And when it came to the review time, everybody was in one room, and I was off in another room all by myself for the mechanical and the electrical engineers. The FY16 housing designer got a little bit smarter. He got my comments ahead of time and addressed many of those before they finished their design. The pre-functional checklists were included in the commissioning project specifications. Commissioning agent did not vary from those. What those said is what he did. Unfortunately, the checklist did not address the zoning systems. These were lead buildings, of course, and so they had to have a zoning system. So there were 2 zones. Lennox zoning system is what they put in, upstairs and downstairs or front and back. Some of the buildings, some of the residences were 1 story. And we had numerous problems with those as time went along. We still do. The functional performance checklists, again, were included in the commissioning specifications. Commissioning agents didn't vary from those checklists, and they were very simplistic. And the checklist did not adequately address the zoning system that was installed on the furnaces. Some of the commissioning issues. The furnaces on both projects had very specific requirements on how you had to install the condensate system. Apparently the contractor who installed those had never read that requirement. And I was there, it was the first day of commissioning, and I opened up the installation manual and I'm reading, and I said, oh, by the way, did you do this? So they had not only done it on none of the houses that they were building on the island, they hadn't done it on any of the houses that they worked on off the island. They just completely ignored that part. The operation and programming of the furnace zoning system. This was really interesting. No one understood how the system was supposed to work. By the project designer, mechanical contractors, the commissioning agent, or the balancing contractor. None of them, because they all thought variable air volume, they thought it meant variable air volume, like a true VAV system. Well, that's not what a furnace zoning system is. So I tried to explain it to them, because I'd actually put in a couple of these as a contractor. They kind of ignored me, and the end result was I was never asked back to any of the further commissioning meetings on that project. Apparently they don't like the owner being smarter than the contractor or the engineer. The FY15 contractors, though, were a little bit different, so they were able to accept what I told them, and they were actually able to set the system up and get it operating. But there was still some design issues. So post-acceptance, we found that because the checklist didn't really check the operation of the furnaces, it just checked to see that the zone dampers themselves open and closed. It didn't check like the system response under heating or cooling. What we found out is that on the one project, they had used two-stage furnaces. And so when they went to one zone, one specific zone, the upstairs zone, the airflow wasn't high enough on the furnace. So if the heat came on, furnace tripped off on safeties. Guess what? It's still like that. They still have not fixed that. On the FY16 housing project, they actually used modulating furnaces and condensing units, so that took care of that problem. I mentioned the deficiency for the FY15 housing project has never been corrected. I should point out the FY15 housing project was a Corps of Engineers in-house design. The next project we dealt with was also about the same time. This was a child development center. I did the mechanical design on this one. This one was a child development center that had been put up about 5 years earlier, and it was a design built by some contractor, shipped to the island on semis, and then set down on the prepared footings. Everything was hooked together between all the modules, and they walked away. The problem is the building experienced relatively high humidity levels. That was because they brought outdoor air, untreated outdoor air, to fan coil units within the space. In an effort to solve that, they installed a makeup air unit that conditioned that outdoor air, but that only made the matter worse because now the fan coils ran even less. And the high humidity levels were so bad that the moisture actually collected on the floor. And they had little kids, and of course the instructors were slipping on the floor. So they asked me to look at that. So essentially we took the fan coil units, out, put in new ones, but we put the coils in so that we could do a dehumidification cycle. We called for the commissioning agent to be a sub of the lead contractor, and in this case, the lead contractor was in fact a mechanical contractor. We had a local commissioning agent and a local balancing contractor, and they were both separate firms. We used the pre-functional checklists like they had in the UFC by the Corps of Engineers, and they were not modified or updated. Neither were the functional performance checklists. The control system was tested and verified, but they did it by manipulating overrides in the DDC control system, and as a result, that created a operational issue, and the programming error caused the units, once the unit went into dehumidification mode, it never came out. It just ran continuous. There was no exit out for the lack of if-then statement. There was no way to back out of that. I found that about 2 weeks after the project, quote, the project had been completed. And I told the contractor, and they came in, and all they had was one line to all the programming, and that took care of the issue. But the reason we didn't discover that during the commissioning process is all they did was they told that variable to be dehumidification, and they just watched to see that the valves opened and the temperature dropped on the cooling coil, and they were happy. The next building again was also FY15. This was building 62, first floor. The Rock Iron Arsenal is a very old facility. We were actually a Confederate prisoner of war camp. We have about 1,000 Confederate soldiers actually buried on the Rock Iron Arsenal. So a lot of our buildings date back a long time. We have a group of stone buildings and I mean stone, it's 24-inch thick limestone. Most of those buildings were built in the 1865 to 1867 time frame. So that's the type of buildings we're dealing with. And of course back then, the buildings were ventilated with air or outside air, so the windows are extremely large. So it just gives you an idea of the type of facility we're dealing with. Anyway, this building had temperature issues. And when the air conditioning was originally installed in this building, it was a multi-zone. And essentially it was just an open office with an open office of about 40,000 square feet with a couple small private offices. Since then, it had been chopped up into conference rooms and who knows what all. But they never added any zones to the multi-zone. So the temperatures were wacky. They tried to put VAV boxes on the multi-zones to solve some of that issues. So we replaced all that. And again, we required the commissioning agent to be a subcontractor, the general contractor. In this case, we did have a general contractor because we went through and insulated all the walls. Believe it or not, the walls had never been insulated. They were still the uninsulated stone. And again, we had a local commissioning and balancing agent, and they were two separate firms. They were in fact the same firm from the prior project. So a lot of the balancing commissioning were done by the same contractor for several of these. Of course, checklists, we used the same checklists as we always had by the Corps of Engineers. They were never modified. Functional performance, exactly the same. Commissioning issues. Again, contractors have difficulty reading. The air handling units leaked water through the bottom of the unit onto the floor, but they couldn't figure out why. Well, if they had looked down and saw the little tag on the metal plate that was bolted to the floor, it would have told them, you have to remove this plate and reinstall it over that joint between the two sections so the water doesn't go down between those two sections. Again, nobody noticed that except the government representative. Post-acceptance, believe it or not, we didn't have any problems after that. That project went so well that we went from 1 to 2 complaints a day to 1 to 2 complaints a year. The next project was our exercise facility, and we had problems with water condensing on the roof insulation screws and dripping down onto the running track. So we modified the existing air handling unit, installed a reheat coil so that we could do some dehumidification because it got rather humid in there. Plus they had steam rooms and they didn't understand that they're meant to add humidity to the space. Contract called again for the commissioning agent to be a sub to the general. I had the same local commissioning and balancing agents, 2 different firms. But there was a major change at this time because of the issues we had had with the commissioning up to that point. That's when I happened to find the VA manual, and I know a lot of you don't hate that manual, but the Veterans Administration has a very extensive testing procedure for equipment, and that's what we adopted. And we actually handed that out to the contractors, and they had to revise their checklist so that they matched up with what those requirements were. Manual overrides essentially were done. You could program in offsets, but not manual overrides. And we required the checklist now to be job specific. So we didn't include the pre-functional checklist or the functional performance checklist in the project specifications and drawings. We let the contractors develop those. The problem we had was commissioning agent used a commissioning software program online, I won't mention the name, and he had difficulty adapting that software to be job specific. It wanted to be job generic. But he finally figured out how to do that, but that did cause about a 2-week delay while he was trying to figure that out. And again, we had absolutely no commissioning issues on that project, and it's been running fine ever since. And there have been no issues since that time. Building 212 chiller replacement, we replaced 150-ton and 300-ton water-cooled chillers with 2 300-ton air-cooleds. We also changed all the air handling units to 2-way valves to accommodate variable airflow or variable water flow, and we replaced all the existing pumps. Commissioning agent was a subcontractor, the general. In this case, the general was a mechanical contractor. We had local and commissioning agent and balancing agent, and they were the same as before. And they were separate firms, so they were familiar with what I was after. We didn't have any issues during commissioning. We only came across one problem during the actual commissioning, and that was the programming and DDC controls. This was a different manufacturer than we normally used on the island. Not the chiller manufacturer, but the actual DDC control contractor. And he used what I call ladder programming. And I asked him to interpret that ladder programming into English. They either could not do it or would not do it, which I was not very happy with, because I like to understand, you know, if you got a whole bunch of lines going in the little box that makes the decision, I want to know what that little box is doing. It's not black. So we had trouble doing commissioning on that. Building 250 high bay HVAC installation. This was a building that the manufacturing took over to put in 3D printing processes. They're actually looking to put 3D printers on semis or in a semi-trailer and ship it to the front lines. Therefore, if you need parts, replacement parts, you don't have to wait for those parts to come overseas. You print replacement parts right there. They're not as good as the original, but they'll still last in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 months. It's really kind of a neat program. This project, because of the short time frame, this project did not get assigned until just before the end of the fiscal year. We had to go design build on this project. So we had a general contractor, a mechanical contractor, and electrical. We ended up with 3 single zone VAV rooftop units with dehumidification on 2 of the 3 units. Commissioning agent was it was supposed to be a sub to the general. The general ignored that, and the mechanical contractor hired the commissioning agent. Again, local commissioning agent, balancing agents. So pretty much, unless it's a core job, the balancing and the commissioning are provided by local agents within our area, which is kind of nice. There's like 3 firms in our area, and I've worked with all 3 firms at one time or another, so they're all familiar to me and they're all familiar with me. Pre-construction, prepackaged DDC controls for rooftop units. The programming was actually considered proprietary by the rooftop unit manufacturer. And the manufacturer would not provide detailed operation instructions. So how do you test something? To make the unit go into dehumidification mode, there had to be 9 different items that had to be satisfied before that unit would go into dehumidification mode. And they wouldn't even tell you what those 9 items were. So as a result, the commissioning process was very limited. Just basically standard checklist. There was nothing else we could do. So because of that, there was nothing more we could do in commissioning. And we really haven't had any problems since that installation. And in the same building, there's a low bay area that they wanted finished out. So this was, again, a design build because, of course, the funding came through just before the end of the year. It was basically a singles or a rooftop VAV unit with hot water reheat VAV boxes. Again, the commissioning agent was local. He was supposed to be a sub to the general contractor. He was not. He's a sub to the mechanical. This is the one where we had commissioning issues that caused a major change in our thought at the Rock-On Arsenal. Again, prepackaged DDC controls would not support what the designer wanted them to do. And they argued for 6 months. Actually, I think what they wanted us to do is to say it will be all right and we will accept it the way it is. But I said, no, that's not my job. It's the designer's choice whether or not he wants to accept it. So finally, they accepted it. We were able to make the system work, kind of. But a result of that was that we no longer permit packaged controls on any pieces of equipment except for chillers and boilers. So even air handling, we do roof mounted stuff, but it's all custom built. So we don't do packaged equipment anymore at the Rock-On Arsenal. And the main reason is because they won't tell us how it's supposed to work. So the next process here, and the next project was a Building 104 classroom training build out. We revised the HVAC to several classrooms and provided air conditioning to 2 new spaces that were taken over as classrooms. Most of it was existing HVAC. The air handling unit was modified from a single zone system to a variable volume, variable temperature system. Again, we required the commissioning agent to be sub to the general, and believe it or not, he was. We used local commissioning agent and balancing agent. Commissioning agent, balancing agent were separate firms. This was my first experience with this commissioning agent. He was relatively new to the area, so there was a little bit of training involved. However, it did go pretty good. He actually found some things that were broken. Again, he used the same software that the other commissioning agent used, and he had a hard time modifying that to be job specific. Software was always driving it to be job generic. And here I say he identified several existing DDC control components that were not working. So we fixed those. The only problem we had was the DDC contractor improperly assigned a new VAV box to a nearby system. Nobody caught that until I looked at how his programming was set up. This VAV box was on a completely different system, yet it was tied into the decision making on the system, on this other system. No post-commissioning issues that I'm aware of. Final one, building 299. This is where we started to go custom. We replaced 4 direct-fired gas rooftop units, installed 4 custom build-ups with hot water coils and a whole new boiler system. Contract required commissioning agent to be a subcontractor to the general. In this case, the mechanical was the general. Local commissioning agent, balancing agent. The commissioning firm, I don't understand what I wrote here, but the commissioning firm was, I had worked with the commissioning firm before, but not with this individual. Again, we had problems with generic checklists. He used the same software, must be very popular with the commissioning group. And the checklists, I actually did get a couple of the pieces of equipment did not reflect the actual installation. Matter of fact, the makeup air units that were sent to me, the checklists were for a gas-fired DX unit, whereas we had a hot water with no cooling. Commissioning has not yet been completed on this project. This is just finishing up. We also did some retro commissioning. There's a class that the Corps of Engineers teaches that I took. It was online during the pandemic that dealt with retro commissioning. So we actually did retro commissioning, or looking at a couple of the buildings. And we found some really strange problems. One was some of the designers didn't put face and bypass on the heating coils that were subject to temperatures 32 degrees and below. I guess they don't. I guess they assume that it's going to operate 100% of the time. Failure to consider stratification at the coils. We have problems with this. We also had problems with adequate staging on DX to prevent excessive cycling. For some reason, all of our projects, if 25% is oversized, is good enough. 50% is even better. We have matter of fact, this one unit that I was looking at, the the second stage compressor only runs about 15 minutes a year, and the third and fourth stage never run. Controls, outdoor air temperature sensors located behind the outdoor air dampers in an area that was heated. Okay, so when the unit starts up, it thinks the air is a lot warmer than it actually is, and we've actually had coils freeze because of this problem. Single point sensors located outside the main airstream. The control guys are always doing that. Misapplication of the averaging type sensors. They fail to read that there's a recommended square footage per length of sensor. On building 299, when I got the submittal, they had one freestat in there, or one averaging, yes, one freestat in there. They required 4. Some of the other issues we find: night setback or cooling affecting the main air handling unit. Believe it or not, we actually have some of the buildings are programmed that if one VAV box requires their heating or cooling in the night setback mode, that it starts the air handling unit. That's fine. But all the other VAV boxes are all set to 0 airflow, so they all close. So I start a 30,000 CFM air handling unit for a VAV box that moves 300 CFM. Luckily, there are overpressure sensors. The other one, we also have some buildings that have fan-powered VAV, but they're not programmed to operate on a call for heating in the unoccupied mode. And it actually says in the programming that it was assumed that the building runs 24/7. But they set the air handling unit up to run on an occupancy schedule. So if the occupancy schedule was actually active in the wintertime, on a call for heat, you never would get a call for heat because the fan-powered VAV box would never turn on. So there's great potential for freezing stuff inside the building. So why is commissioning important to us as an owner? Of the 8 projects that I've discussed here, 4 had design issues, 3 had installation issues, 5 projects had control programming issues. That's a deficiency rate of about 1.5 issues per project. And these are small projects. These aren't the big research centers of the hospitals. I can't even imagine what kind of nightmare they are. On the retro commissioning projects, we found 3 design issues, 3 installation issues, and 2 programming issues. Other potential issues that we run across: excessive energy usage. Almost all of our buildings operate 24/7, and that's not because they're occupied. It's because we restrict the warm up or cool down mode to 1 hour ahead. Well, our buildings are stone, uninsulated stone to the vast majority. It takes more than an hour to heat those up, or cool those back down after a 2-day or 3-day weekend. But programming changes to accommodate deficiencies. This happens all the time. The base ops HVAC contractor just goes out and starts closing outdoor air dampers, ignoring the ASHRAE standard 62 to try and maintain temperatures in the space. And the programming also change. They also do some questionable programming changes to overcome some of the deficiencies. I've tried to catch those and adjust those, but I have not had much luck yet. Objective 2, how commissioning agents should be acquired: through the project general contractor or direct through the owner. My personal opinion should be through the owner, okay? But there's problems with that. Let's talk about doing it through the general contractor first. Pros: management of the commissioning agents becomes the GC's responsibility, not ours. The GC is more knowledgeable about construction activities than most owners. Cons, the GC may not provide the commissioning agent with adequate information in a timely manner. I see that all the time. GC typically does not allow adequate time in the construction schedule, as you all know. And the owner is only aware of what the GC tells them. Okay? If we talk about through the owner is aware of what the commissioning agent's needs and requirements are, so that we can push or beat on the general contractor a little bit harder to get that information. The owner is aware of the scheduling requirements, and the owner is able to select a commissioning agent based upon past performance. That's not the government. The last sentence is not the government, unfortunately. Part of the problem is the owner needs to understand the commissioning process, and most owners don't, unless you're a large facility user like a government facility user or a medical facility or a university. You really have to be a large user to really understand that commissioning process. If you're a onesie-twosie building, you don't care. The owner needs to understand what information is critical to the process, which is where the commissioning agent comes in. The owner needs to have the time to coordinate between the contractors, which can be a fair amount of time, specifically on larger projects. So the correct answer depends upon the skill level and abilities of the owner. If the owner is able to do it, then I recommend that the owner do it. Available time that the owner has to manage the process. I would love to take on the commissioning process, but unfortunately I don't have time in my schedule. We are actually, believe it or not, we are short 2 electricals and one mechanical engineer at our site. So right now I'm covering the work of 3 other engineers. So there's not a lot of free time in my schedule. So, but I would dearly love to take commissioning as a on. And the type of owner, with large buildings or campuses, like I mentioned, the owner is a prime candidate for acquiring the commissioning services. All right, side note, Rock Island considerations. Show what size we are. We have 119 different occupiable structures on our installation. 46 of these buildings contain HVAC systems on DDC controls. The rest are pneumatic. We're still living in the dark ages. 216 various HVAC systems spread throughout these buildings. We have approximately 1,700 DDC controllers on the Rock Island Arsenal. And that's only the ones we can see. The ones that are on the other side of the Jace, we can't see those. So actually that number is probably closer to 4,000, 5,000 controllers on the Rock Island Arsenal. Because of some of the programming issues that we talked about earlier during that retro commissioning, those were all brought on by projects that we did in-house. They were less than $250,000. We never required commissioning on those before. Matter of fact, I was not aware of a lot of those. We have a separate group that handles, I want to say, the contractors. I'm the design side, and I only hear about the contractor side if something doesn't work. Well, their controls didn't work. So now we require commissioning on projects even in the $250,000 range. And of course, but that's all done in-house. But anything that's connected to the DDC control system has to be commissioned. Retro commissioning, we've uncovered issues in 2 projects, and both of those are a result of replacing existing controls, as I mentioned before. And those 2 projects were the driving force of why we require commissioning now on projects that are less than $250,000. Typical stumbling blocks. what we find. Failure of the designer to understand the limitations of the equipment or the system. That's a big one. I fight that one every day. Late involvement of the commissioning agent. There's a lot of projects I don't even hear from the commissioning agent until the project's like half done. Lack of submission requirements by the commissioning agent. I have yet to get a list from the commissioning agent defining what information he requires to do his job. I've never seen that list since I've been doing this. This is a heartburn of mine, delaying IOM manuals until the end of the project. Okay? In my opinion, the IOM manual should be up front with the equipment submittal. Reason being is we need to read those to understand how that equipment's installed. The fact the contractor's been installing these for the past 10 years does not mean that he knows how to install this one. Some of the more stumbling blocks, a lack of information on prepackaged factory controls. Like I said, that's why we've gone away from prepackaged factory controls. Hidden programming issues. Unless you do the full out testing and test every response of the software programming, you're not going to hit those programming issues. Failure to provide for adequate monitoring of system performance. We are guilty of this. When we put in our DDC system, we didn't put in any ability to record data other than what's on the controller, which is about a day and a half. So finally, I snuck it into a project to add that memory storage, but unfortunately, we are fighting our NEC, our IT services on that. And failure to customize the commissioning process to best match the project. And the last one, what needs to be done to improve? Project schedules need to incorporate the steps identified in the commissioning process. Matter of fact, a lot of projects I see don't even get project schedules. O&M manuals need to be incorporated up front. Checklists need to be customized to match the project. Functional checklists need to identify specific steps in the evaluation along with anticipated outcomes. Owners need to incorporate trending into control system capabilities beyond what is available in the controllers. Like I said, we currently rely on the controllers. Downloading that data every day and a half to 2 days can get to be a real burden. Require trend analysis at the end of each season, both cooling and heating. We don't require that right now. Do not substitute tools for knowledge or thinking. Questions? I'm going to ask if you use the microphone. I'm a little hard of hearing. There's the gentleman out there. Let's go there first. I think he raised his hand first.
So you were talking earlier about that multifamily housing project you were doing. You said you found 900 comments. Mm-hmm. How many of those were repeat comments, and what sort of value did you think 900 comments brought to the project?
Okay, there were, in that housing project, there were 6 different houses. So if you take the 900 and divide it by 6, that's roughly 150 repetitive comments, because they made the same mistake every time. So 150 repetitive comments. Most of the comments that I made, well, actually all the comments I made, they accepted all of them except one. So they must have, I would assume they had some impact on the final project. That's about all I can answer. I mean, they were all eventually incorporated except for that one. And then this gentleman here.
So I got a couple questions. As far as your BAS system, is it just one common DDC control system, or do you have a few of them?
We have multiple systems on the island, but we only have one server system. So everything else must communicate through JACES to our server system. So.
Okay, and you mentioned that night setback mode for that VAV system. Was that air handler, did that have trained VFDs on it?
I'm going to say yes.
Yeah, because we've ran into that same issue. It was a brand new train VAV system, train unit, train VFDs, and it would do that same thing. You know, all the units were at minimum or closed, and at night or whenever it would just overpressurize, and it would get up to about 5 inches because we actually hooked up to the sensor and set that. But yeah, over at Los Alamos, we do the same thing. They gut all the train packaged controls and put all ALC. But thank you.
The only problem that I see with using overpressurization sensors is that when you have to run the VFD in hand position, it won't run. It trips off all the time. This gentleman up front here.
You seem to have a lot of issues with the commissioning provider not, that's what I'm looking for, customizing the checklist. So
Yes.
I'm curious if the specified requirements or the contract requirements for the commissioning provider were to strictly abide by the specifications, in which case you would be obligated as commissioning provider to just provide whatever the specification showed as the generic checklist.
No,
So
well,
I'm just curious if
okay.
that was a barrier to
No.
the provider
No.
customizing the checklists.
No, we purposely did not include those standardized checklists, and we reworded it such that the checklist had to be job or equipment specific.
Okay. So you've changed the specifications and you've gotten rid of those, but you're still having that problem with a lack of customization?
Yes.
Okay, I'm really curious about that because we've always customized our checklist to the equipment and to the sequence of operation. So that was something that seemed to be a recurring problem. I was kind of wondering if maybe there was something in the contracting or specifying process.
Not that I'm aware of.
Thank you.
And in the back.
So you went over, it's, obviously better if the owner hires the commissioning agent, versus the contractor. In your experience, if you had the same commissioning provider, do you think you would get a different service if that same one was hired by you or the contractor?
I would say that I would probably get better service if the commissioning agent was hired by the owner, only because you have a chance for more communication. The GC is a buffer between you and the commissioning agent. So the GC gets upset when you go around him, even though the specifications say you can do that.
It's in the contract.
It's
I
in
talk
the
to the government
contract.
all the time, so.
The GC doesn't like that. So,
But as a CX agent, you're the owner rep no matter what.
excuse me?
As a CX agent, you're still the owner's rep no matter what.
That's right. But when you're contractually to the general contractor, you have to listen to him to some extent because he's the guy who's paying your bill. Yes, might not usually next time. At some point, everybody, you're going to find you're going to find somebody who's going to bid on that work no matter what the restrictions are. Okay? At some point, you're going to find somebody who's hungry enough to do that. That's why we get some of the contractors that we get on the Rock Island Arsenal. Yes.
Have you ever had a commissioning agent hired through the design engineer?
No, because in our cases, the design engineer is either us in-house or it's the Corps of
Core,
Engineers.
okay.
And unfortunately, we can't, as a garrison, procure design services unless we do it through a design build concept. One more question, way over there. This will be the last one.
What manufacturer of the rooftop units would not give you their sequence of operation for the package controls?
I'm sorry, I can't, that would be unfair to that manufacturer.
It would not be unfair to us, though.
What does it rhyme with?
Let's say they're north of Iowa. Does that help? They're north of Iowa. All right. Thank you all.